we are going to formally start now. I just want first to introduce myself. My name is Carlos Aquino, and I'm the Interim Chief Diversity Officer. And well, some of you have already met me. And the accent, I'm Brazilian, so from Rio de Janeiro. So today we have the first event in This is Diversity and Inclusion. I'm pushing the agenda here so we can be more diverse in terms of our offerings, events, training, etc. in terms of diversity and inclusion. So today we are going to talk about the dimension that is called people with disabilities. And I'm proud to have here a faculty member and a former student who now is studying at my alma mater, George Washington University in DC. So I first would like to introduce Nathalia Mazza. She graduated from Gettysburg College in 2020. She was diagnosed with ADHD, general anxiety disorder, and a specific learning disorder in elementary school, and diagnosed with autism in her freshman year of college. Some characteristics of her disabilities include stimming, masking, fidgeting, conversations restricted to special interests, slow processing and working speed, extreme emotional experiences, hypo or hypersensitivity to certain noises, smells, textures, sights, and tastes, and difficulty distinguishing when people are joking around or being serious. She's currently studying at George Washington University, as I mentioned before, to become a special education teacher, and considers herself an advocate for students with learning disabilities in the hopes of removing the stigma and increasing disability empowerment. Thank you, Nathalia, for being here today. We also have Professor Stephen Stern. Stephen is a professor of interdisciplinary studies and chair of the Jewish studies here at Gettysburg College. He's the faculty advisor to Phoenix Rising, and is here to discuss challenges with learning disabilities and ADHD. So, as I said, this is the first event that we are hosting this year, the reality of living with a disability. And both of them are going to share their own experience. So it'll be 20 minutes for each one. And at the end, I kindly ask you to save your questions. We expect that you ask questions. So I kindly ask you that you keep your questions to the end when we are going to have the Q&A. And now I'm going to pass the baton to the real, interesting people tonight, Nathalia and Stephen. Thank you so much. Oh, before that, you can come here. I would like to recognize the help from our two interpreters here tonight, Dr. Beth and Monn and Miriam Pipes. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. So today I am here to talk about disabilities and the impact that they have on college campuses. And in order to start our conversation, we have to talk about two terms, ableism and equity. So what is ableism? Ableism is the discrimination of and social prejudice against people with disabilities, and is rooted in the assumption that disabled people require fixing. It includes harmful stereotypes, misconceptions, and generalizations of people with disabilities. Ableism can be intentional or unintentional, so it is important to be aware of what you are saying and doing when interacting with people with disabilities. So what is equity? Social equity takes into account systematic inequalities to ensure everyone in a community has access to the same opportunities and outcomes. Equity of all kinds acknowledges that inequalities exist and works to eliminate them. Statistics about disabilities. 60% of adults with severe literacy problems have an undiagnosed or untreated learning disability. 20% of adolescents have depressive episodes of 2 or more years duration. ADHD affects approximately 19% of high school boys and 10% of high school girls. Anxiety disorders affect approximately 10 to 20% of youth, and 15 to 20% of the population has a language-based learning disorder. So why is this important? Whether these statistics talk about adults or children, 21.3% did not get a high school diploma. 36.8% completed high school but did not go to college. 25.5% went to college but did not finish. And only 16.4% received a BA or higher. Our goal as a college is not to make all disabled people go to college. The goal is to make college a navigable option for those who want it. We can only do this by creating an equitable and inclusive campus for all. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about my Gettysburg experience. When I first came to Gettysburg College, I did not know I had autism. I had severe anxiety, especially social anxiety. When it came to reaching out for help, I was able to reach out for help when I was at my best and when I was at my worst. But in the middle, I couldn't do it. My anxiety prohibited me from going to my teachers and saying, I can't do this. It was hard. And I had panic attacks to the point where my hands would freeze and shake and my whole body would go numb. I tried really hard and I really cared about my classes, but for some reason, my homework would not get turned in. Do you know how hard it is to go up to a professor when you're not turning in work and tell them that you're struggling with this because you're afraid that they're going to think you're lazy? It's hard. During my winter break of freshman year, I finally got my autism diagnosis. And that's when I decided that I was going to do something about it. I struggled with social interactions. I had no friends. And I decided that I wanted to create a place where people could come and make friends and feel safe. So I created Phoenix Rising, a club for students with disabilities to feel comfortable and to have conversations without being judged. It was hard to get started because a lot of people are afraid of the stigma. But I am so happy to say that it is still a club on this campus. My experiences have taught me that we need people to speak up about this. We cannot do anything without the voices of people with disabilities. So I decided to do a little survey, and some of you have sheets that have answers from that survey. So what I did was I asked students, first of all, what disabilities they experience. Answers I got: anxiety, depression, autism spectrum disorder, ADHD, specific learning disorder, auditory processing issues, sensory processing disorder, Tourette syndrome, and OCD. So what I'd like for us to do is talk about some of these experiences that these students had. For instance, I asked, if you didn't have to worry about how your professors would react, what is one or two things you would want them to understand about your disability? The first thing I got, that their workload and what kind of work they ask of us absolutely will have an impact on our mental health. But that you as professors hold a lot of power in making that impact either super awful or not so awful. So you can make it easier to manage for us just by being supportive. Even if you assign all that work, you can still make it manageable for us. Another person said, missing class should not be penalized, as we cannot control when our physical or mental health flare up. This is really important because we can't. It's just like any sickness. I mean, you can't control if you get the flu. You can't control if you get COVID. There are things you can do to kind of manage, to try to prevent, but you still, if you get it, you get it. And with a mental disability, you can't control when those episodes flare up. Another person says, I am not lazy. It just takes me longer and more energy to complete assignments than a non-disabled person, and I end up not being able to finish all of my assignments because of the amount of energy and time it takes to read or write one page or complete one worksheet. I really care about my classes, but often struggle to complete all the work for class and sometimes struggle to pay attention, even when the topic is interesting to me, because I end up focusing on how I didn't finish my assignment for class. I stim when I'm excited, and I stim when I'm stressed. Flappy arms mean happy arms. Rubbing hands together means I'm anxious. Another person said, me doodling in class helps me to pay attention. Me not understanding what they're asking the first time they ask isn't because I wasn't paying attention. I just have trouble understanding spoken words sometimes. Another person says, I have to take tests in a separate room because my tics will disrupt other students, and trying to suppress them makes most of my concentration, which hurts my performance on tests. My professors allowed this for major tests, but often didn't give me the option to test in separate rooms for pop quizzes. Just because a quiz takes less time doesn't mean my disability goes away. I then asked, have you ever experienced ableism by faculty or staff member at Gettysburg College, and what was your experience? Some people said no, and some people don't experience ableism, but some people do, and so it's not something to take lightly. For one person, they said, it's not ableism, but I think sometimes they think some of my coping methods are signs of me disrespecting them, their time, rather than what they are. Example, doodling in class, fidgeting, not looking at their eyes when talking to them. Another person said, nothing specific to any person, rather it's the norms and systems in place. Grading systems, rigid deadlines, the pressure to be hyper-involved on campus, completely inadequate counseling services that make student life unbearable and pushes mentally ill students to unwellness and crisis, and does not support them once in crisis. And another person said, yes, many times. It's always faculty members in my experience. Professors saying insensitive things about my disability, making me feel bad for it. And things like saying, you don't look disabled. You don't look autistic. You don't look like you have ADHD. Those things are not compliments. Those hurt us. Those say to us that our experiences don't matter. And they do. They're real. Just because they're in our heads doesn't make them imaginary. They still exist. It's health of your brain. Yes, it's in your head, it's the health of your brain. So how can you help students with disabilities? Ask how you can support us. Take action when I tell you how to support us, when we tell you how to support us. Take notice when we are failing, when we are falling behind, and be willing to reach out. For those of us with anxiety, you reaching out before we've fallen completely behind shows us that you care, and it will help us to reach out to you in the future, because we won't reach out to you unless we trust you. So show us that we can trust you. Don't just say it. The college should adequately resource counseling services, more counselors, more appointment times, longer appointments. The workload should overall be reduced for all students, and burnout culture should be discouraged. No student should be staying up past midnight to finish a paper or to finish their readings. It's not good for any of our healths. We should be mindful of what words that we are saying at all times, and understand that every student has their limitations, and they will tell you what those limitations are. And we will try to go past those limitations, but understand that when we say that this is our limit, this is our limit. Make space in the beginning of class to make it clear that if there's an issue, that it's okay to come talk to you. And do it during class, do it after class, whenever, but make it clear that you are accessible and that you are willing to talk things through. One way that you can give students the opportunity to talk about their disabilities in a safe way is to use note cards at the beginning of the school year and have students write down what they want you to know, so that they can tell you what their disability does to them. And then finally, what can the university do to make navigating all aspects of campus life more manageable for students? Retrofit all campus buildings to be wheelchair accessible on all floors. We've already started doing that, but we need to make all buildings accessible. For mandatory events, be conscientious of the noise level, especially with music or mechanical noises. Students who need extended time don't just need it for tests. Being conscientious of that when assigning like 7 hours of reading means those students are taking 10.5 hours for 1.5 times extra time, or 14 hours if they get double time. Same for projects and other things. Not saying to cut back, but just be aware that the workload for those students is going to be a lot heavier. Have a safe space for students to go when they're feeling anxious. This is crucial. We need to have a sensory space for students to calm down and to get refocused. This means having fidgets. This means having sensory items like weighted blankets, comfortable chairs, coloring books. I know we're adults, but we still need these items. We have anxiety, we have depression, we have all sorts of learning disorders. These items help, they work. They work for kids, they work for adults. Professors need to be willing to reach out. This is crucial because it will help with our anxiety if you reach out first. And then explain to professors their mistakes and educate them about the issues their students are going through. And be less stringent, have less stringent requirements for getting accommodations. Allow for students who don't have testing give them the opportunity to explain why they think they need accommodations. Because getting tested is not affordable to everyone. It is expensive. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Natalia. And I have to say that regarding the institutional suggestion that she's making, that I'm taking that very seriously. And I just want to add before we talk, we give the word to Stephen, is that besides the physical accessibility to the facilities, and Adrian is going to like that, so I think we should invest in digital accessibility as well. Okay, Stephen, the floor is yours.
That was great, homie. I think Natalia did a really good job. I have a theory about conferences, and it goes like this. Graduate students give really well-researched papers. Every T is crossed, every I is dotted. Assistant professors also do the same. Great papers. An associate tenured professor comes in with, I want to run a few things by you to see what you think. And a full professor is like, I had an idea, and I just thought I'd come in and present, right? And so she was a typical graduate student. I'm a typical associate professor, going to run some ideas around you. And I'm actually going to read you something I wrote last year that I think really captures what I want to talk about regarding ADHD, learning disabilities, and things like that. And I'm going to riff on it as I read. I'm going to stop reading and just, kind of talk about some things. So a department chair recently, some of you have seen this. So a department chair recently announced at a meeting that students challenged by cognitive, psychological, or emotional issues are to no longer be referred to as disabled. We must henceforth call them differently abled. This is really funny because when I was telling a friend, they're like, I think the term differently abled comes from a Simpsons episode. But I looked it up, it doesn't actually. It was mentioned in the Simpsons episode, but it doesn't come from the Simpsons. The change is well-meaning, but harms many students it was aimed at helping. I know this because I'm not only the advisor to Phoenix Rising, our college's support group for students with learning challenges, but I myself am learning disabled. The element of political correctness is correct, though. But we must be equally thoughtful in our attempts to linguistically intervene. The central insight of political correctness partly comes from two figures in continental philosophy, my area of specialization. The first is Friedrich Nietzsche, who in the Genealogy of Morals pointed out that those who have the most political capital also have the power to define the central terms in our language. How we speak invisibly contains the biases of those in control. And when we heard Natalia talking about her concerns as a student and for other students in the class, we could hear her statements coming from students reflecting the political control that professors and others in authority have over these kinds of dynamics. And so that type of power is really critical for those in authority to understand that we exercise in the way we speak. For example, just telling a student with ADHD or a student who's on the spectrum that you're disappointed with them can have profound effects. Just that one word can take that student out of the game. So we have to learn, and we need to do better training. It's coaching, it's not counseling, it's just some coaching about how to speak to people who are challenged in this way, because what you don't see is how self-critical they are all day long. Nonstop. They are continually translating to be part of your world. They're exhausted. It's all day they're translating. All day, in a classroom. When you gave the example of a student not being able to process the professor's question. Yep, that student's gone for the rest of the class. The students become self-conscious about what just happened. Does the professor think I'm a loser now? All this stuff is happening to that student, and we just lost them. And just a little switch of speech. Homie, you don't know yet? I'll come back to you. Think about it, right? Just little things like this, right? Keep her in the game, but that's going to also stress her out, I realize. I'll come back to you. Sorry. Not the best move. But let me go on. The other is Simone de Beauvoir, who in The Second Sex points out that in setting out a description of who she is, she would start by saying that she is a woman, a move that a man never has to make. Right? I've never, as a man, had to say, I'm a man. Well, yes, I actually have, but I think you get the point. To be other is defined in the negative, as a deviation from normal. And since norms are enforced, to be other is to be less than. Right? I used to say growing up that, oh, Stephen, you're such an exception to the rules. And my line was always, but the rules don't like exceptions. Right? We were always negotiating with the rules on my behalf, which itself is diminishing. Right? Because it sets you apart. And since norms are enforced, to be other is to be less than. The hope of political correctness that was that by coming up with new terms that do not derive from traditional power structures, they could be cleansed of the power to diminish those in the outgroups. Thus, we should prefer new terms, right? Referring to the socially othered in order to help undermine the oppressive structures that have been built to keep them down. It's very sensible. But those of us with cognitive challenges, the line goes, are thus like women, people of color, and members of the LGBTQ communities in being oppressed, and thus we need a new, uncorrupted, celebratory label. We are to be differently abled. Well-intended, yes, but no. I am learning disabled. I am not differently abled. I've heard the story of a colleague at another institution who, after suffering a stroke, lost his sense of spatial awareness and relied on his GPS to get him from his home office to his office, a trip he has taken 5 times a week for 30 years. But after the stroke, he suddenly found that he had computational abilities that he'd never had or possessed. He could do quantitative work he'd been incapable of before. This person became differently abled. That is not true of me. Abilities and challenges like dyscalculia, these are not some double-edged sword that conveys both advantages and disadvantages to me academically. They just make it harder, right? There are things you have when you're ADHD that are like superpowers, the capacity to hyperfocus. Thank goodness, right? Thank goodness that comes with it, because if it didn't, a lot of us would not be where we are. But it'd be better if we didn't need to have a capacity to hyperfocus. It'd be better if we could just run the course as others do. As I'll get into that in a second, though. I'm worried about my time. Got a lot going on up here for me. Hang on. I am proud of... Oh, hold on. They just make life harder. I was fortunate to come from a family of sufficient means, with a savvy and caring mother who had me at a young age tested and diagnosed and formulated a plan of action to allow me to succeed. If I'd come from a poor family, which you noted when we talked about people who are unable to afford testing and things like that, it's a very different world. I would have been labeled stupid and out of control. I have no doubt of that. I have no doubt. Because so many are. They didn't come from my circumstances in my world where that wasn't allowed. But in other worlds, you're allowed to speak of people that way, and they are. But with the proper tutoring, medication, and schooling, I was able to go to college, earn a PhD, and become a tenured professor and chair of Jewish studies at Gettysburg College. And I'm proud of what I am, and I'm prouder still because it was much harder than it would have been if I did not have these particular learning challenges. Let me skip this part. So I talk about how, I have to compete with colleagues with publishing and all these kinds of things and the challenges that I face with that. For example, ADHD people have what's called the curvilinear understanding of the world and time. They don't see beginning, middle, or end. Right? So when I write a paper, I have to do beginning, middle, and end. Right? I have to translate how I see the world into another style. It's a very different way of speaking. And what's interesting is I became adept at writing papers. I'm not great at it, but adept at it early in high school, we had a playwriting contest in a class, and I won. I could write dialogue. I couldn't write a paper for the life of me, but I could write a dialogue. And so then I discovered quite quickly that if I wrote my papers in dialogue and then rewrote them in prose, I wrote good papers. Because I struggled with transitions. Remember, I don't see beginning and end. Everything is always in the middle. Right? So if I begin to talk and you might have trouble following me, like, what are you talking about? Because I'm beginning in the middle. It's where I see things beginning. I don't see beginning and end. But you do. And so to be an effective professor, to be an effective writer, I have to write at the beginning and end. And it also affects how we see time. We don't see time in a linear way at all. And part of that is neurological. We are constantly seeking stimulation. Right? The ADHD brain, we know there's a lot that contributes to it, but one is a dopamine deficit. So we are dopamine hunters. Right? And what's going to pull us away from anything is the stimulation of dopamine. And we have to learn how to manage that. And at the college age, it's really hard. You have so many things happening to you. And you've got to manage that you don't get enough stimulation in your brain without the right type of thing happening. And the right type of thing happening is what interests you. So if you have an ADHD student or ADHD friend, I'm going to tell you a secret about them. They are interest-driven, not reward-driven. You can offer them a reward and they won't get it done. They don't care. You can say, I'll give you $10,000 to do the filing. You'll come back. Did you do the filing? Oh, no. Well, I don't file. Right? It's one of the concerns I have with ADHD students is if they grab an interest in the middle of the class, they can go down a rabbit hole pursuing it. They won't do nothing else matters but the interest. They can't see there's an outcome to this class. They need to be organized. They need to compartmentalize. This does not come naturally, especially at 18 to 22, right? Because they're interest-driven. That's going to give them dopamine. Now, your average person has enough dopamine, right, to pay a bill. Your ADHD person can sit there staring at a bill for months. They can be so successful in so many ways, but that bill will not get paid. And you'll be like, what's wrong with you? Oh, it's ADHD. And so there are these weird hiccups that come with it that people don't get. And it speaks to something that Talia said, which is people don't believe it exists, especially for high achievers. All right, they don't believe it exists. How could you get there? Because ADHD in itself is already a bad name. I don't think I'm going to finish my essay for you. I'm just going to jump into something else. Why not just illustrate what this looks like and feels like? So one of my favorite writers who has ADHD is a psychiatrist, Dr. Hallowell, and he wrote an essay recently with John Rady, who's a Harvard psychiatrist, and they're best friends. I think Rady helped Hallowell get through med school, is my guess. But ADHD is not purely a disorder. It is a mix of assets and liabilities. A more representative name for the condition is VAST, or variable attention stimulus trait. Right? Notice I just said ADHD people are interest-driven. That's not an attention deficit. That's just they're going to attend to different things than the average person. Right? Because they are not going to do what doesn't interest them. So when you have an ADHD student in your class, for example, that's getting C's and barely getting through, this kid deserves applause. That kid is digging deep. And I'll tell you why. That student is not interested in school. They are doing what they hate every single day, and they're getting through it. I don't know many people who can do what they hate every day, all day, and hold their head up high. And this speaks to something that Talia said. Faculty, we have a lot of power in these circumstances. A lot of power. That C student may deserve praise for getting that C. Right? You may need to mix it up with some of these students. The goal is for them to learn, and the normal ways we allow them to express themselves aren't always helpful. right? It doesn't mean we can mix it up as much as we'd like to give them opportunities to show what they know, but we can certainly be more patient with the vehicles we use that allow them to show what they've learned. And so I like the word vast. This new model recognizes the phenomenon of what's known as rejection sensitivity dysphoria, which was imminent in most things Nathalia said, is both people on the spectrum and who are ADHD have rejection sensitivity dysphoria. But again, these disorders are, well, not autism is a disorder, but ADHD is. And these spectrums are not necessarily linear, right? Curvilinear. And rejection sensitivity dysphoria is you feel rejected when you're not being rejected. And part of it is the ADHD mind is already rejecting themselves. They're already not getting it right. And they know it. Everything, like someone once said, do you ever forget your ADHD? And I said, not when I'm with others. Right? The others don't let you forget, because you're always negotiating it. You know, always coaching yourself, always managing yourself. And so going back to the students for a second, I am going to read the essay. The students who have these challenges, they're doing the same job as those who don't. And it's all students have challenges. That's true as well. But ADHD and those with ASD, rejection sensitivity dysphoria is a huge part of it. They feel rejected so quickly, as I was saying, and it takes a lot for them to get through that. And one way to get them through it is just be affirming. That will liberate them immediately. If you tell someone who's beating themselves up because you're disappointed in them, I'm not disappointed in you that way, I think the world of you, they will be that fine. It's that simple. They can pivot that quickly. And but they respond very differently. An ADHD person isn't going to respond well to the coach that rides them. They're going to want to quit the team. They're going to respond well to the coach that says, you're so talented, how do I get you to run faster? What can we do? They will respond to that. And so these students, they do the same work. Just as faculty, I serve the same institution and professional community. I'm assessed the same way as my colleagues are without it, as our students with it are assessed the same way. To call them differently abled may falsely attribute to them helpful qualities that would give them an advantage they do not really enjoy and diminishes the real struggles they endure and work around or overcome to succeed and present themselves as able. Right? We have to remember that all day long, these students are trying to present themselves as able. And that's hard. Like if you have to run and you have one leg is longer than the other, that's hard. Right? I used to tell my mother that it was like I'm a collage, but everyone else's collages comes with glue, and I just get my own spit. Right? So they're falling off the collage all day long, and I'm sitting there like trying to keep it up and compete with others, or walking on greased steel with untied shoelaces was another feeling I had growing up. And I'm running on greased steel, right? It's because you're working so hard to keep up. Now as you get older, it gets easier to manage, like with anything, right? Writing from the beginning and end is not the challenge I had in college or high school at all. These people, though, these students work harder in the nuts and bolts of doing college. They suffer emotionally from it and yet keep plugging away, trying to keep up with their peers and the seats around them. And they deserve credit for this. Indeed, they deserve to be celebrated. Linguistically turning a blind eye with differently abled, pretending these challenges aren't real but only different, doesn't help these students and perhaps does a shameful disservice to them. Learning to read with dyslexia or doing math with dyscalculia is exceptionally hard, but it has to happen if one hopes to navigate the world. Calling one different and abled doesn't achieve this. A child unable to read or do math is still going to be measured by reading and math tests, and you gave a statistic of 60%. Their challenges are always here, sometimes much more acutely than at other times, but always with them in the way one with Tourette syndrome always has it. Right? And Nathalia and I both addressed it, that people often don't believe it. I mean, you're looking at two people who are challenged, able to speak to a large group without really blinking. But the students are not differently abled. They are learning disabled. And I applaud them for all they do despite their challenges. And so that's what I have to say today. And it's important. I'll end here. Let me see how much more time I have. All right, we're gone over. I'm done. Thank you.
Okay, now what everybody was waiting for. So you can ask questions to each one of them. We strongly suggest that you walk to the microphones, that you have 2 microphones available, and you just let us know who is your favorite person to answer the question. Do I need to volunteer someone to ask questions? Yeah.
Is it on? Oh, this is more for either one, but as someone who's on the spectrum, I really especially appreciated what you said about like having to constantly like in your head renegotiate and like work twice as hard to seem abled. So my question is, what do you do if you tell someone about that, whether you're a peer or a professor, and they just aren't getting it? Like, who do you turn to institutionally?
So for me, I tried to find people on campus who did get it. Not everyone will get it, and that's unfortunate. I will say Professor Stern is a great person to turn to. Always go to him. Like if you can find him on campus, find him. Because I am serious, because he got me through college. Because he understands, even though he's not autistic, he understands what it's like to have a disability. Find people who get it. And I found really good support in academic advising too. They were really supportive of me. So find people there. If you know other professors who have disabilities, find them. And professors, like, be willing to share if you do have a disability, because that will get your students thinking, hey, I have someone who can advocate for me. That is so important to have. And there are professors on this campus, I can tell you that. So definitely try to search those people out, and if you can't find those people, go to Phoenix Rising. They'll find you people. Yeah. You just have to find a small group of people. You don't even need a huge group, just a small group of people, and you'll be able to get through this. But unfortunately, like, sometimes there's nothing you can do if people are going to be insensitive. You can try all you want to educate them, but sometimes they're not going to respond.
I agree with everything Nathalia said. It's hard. I mean, I think one of the hard things about coming to college for students who are cognitively challenged is that it's a time where they're also learning to advocate for themselves. And that's a really hard transition because, again, you have to negotiate so much just to get to the table to advocate for yourself. But I think what Nathalia said is great self-advocation. Not wasting your time on people who don't get it and finding those who do to help you succeed and get to where you're going.
I just want to add that you can always come to the Office of Diversity and Inclusion on the 2nd floor. I know Penn Hall is not a favorite place for most of you, but I am there, so I want you to see me as a friend and as a resource that I do not have too much experience in this area, but I can definitely help you, first, to feel better, second, to connect with people that can help you.
If anyone else would like to speak, I can also bring you the microphone. So, yep.
How do you think academic advising could do better in assisting students with disabilities? And I know that the college doesn't have like a support system for like an office for students specifically, and what do you think we can do better as an institution?
So Carlos is actually working on getting an office for disability services. Unfortunately, academic advising does not have enough resources to be as supportive as students with disabilities need. They are understaffed to deal with those issues because they also have to deal with neurodivergent or neurotypical students as well. So I'm really hoping that Carlos and the President Iliano, and Gettysburg College will go through with this plan to get an office of disability resources started, because that is the vital #1 step to getting students what they need.
I think there's a lot that we could do differently, and there's a lot of discussions going on. I think one thing that we could do, going back to something that was said earlier, that we could do with your office too, is organize a group of faculty who suffer cognitive challenges, and have them be a support group too for students. We've never done something like that, and that would be something worthwhile.
Yeah, deal. Another thing that I want to add also is that I'm working on creating more awareness about ADA, about the American with Disabilities Act for the whole community, and providing people with the right accommodations. So again, as Natalia mentioned, I'm fighting for the Office of Disabilities, but at this point, it's just an effort. I'm not going to promise when this is going to happen, but since you mentioned, I just want to say that it is true, and I want, as most of you know, I'm the interim person here, and I'm going to be here only for a period of time, but I want that to be part of my legacy when I leave.
You had mentioned that in one of your previous responses that students just sometimes don't get it, but for those who don't have disabilities, what are ways that they have shown to you or acted towards you that made you feel comfortable in telling them about your disabilities?
That's a great question. Definitely don't deny a student. If a student is telling you what they're struggling with, don't deny them their experience. And saying everything's gonna be okay, not a great response. I know it sounds like an okay response, but in the moment when a student with a disability is struggling, all they can focus on is that moment. So be there for them. Just say, hey, I'm here if you need to talk. That's all you have to do. And if people do come to you and tell you what's going on, say, I can see how this is frustrating for you. What can I do to help you get through this? I had friends who, so for me, I really appreciated hugs. Those helped me calm down when I was struggling. And I had friends who would give me a hug as soon as they saw that I was starting to have a panic attack. Not every person likes hugs though. So find out what works for them when they're about to have a meltdown or a panic attack. And just be aware of what you're saying to them, and ask them what their preferences are. That's the biggest thing. And then if they tell you, follow through with those preferences. Don't go and do something else. Do what they have told you helps support them.
I agree with everything you said. I think with ADHD at the age of 18 to 22, there's a lot of shame that comes with it. And so it regarding students with ADHD, that you may be able to tell, sometimes it can be very easy. Wait for them to share it with you before you'd ask, what can I do?
The other thing is, what was I gonna say? Oh yeah, so, oh, nope, I lost it again. If it comes back to you, I'll say it.
You have a question up here.
So I don't know if anybody really can answer this question, but what changes is the college looking to make to better the disabled sensitivity among professors? So, like, for example, I don't just have ADHD and I'm likely on the autism spectrum, but I'm also physically disabled. One of the things I have a really hard time with staircases and whatnot, so I really appreciate you carrying this around. But I've had multiple professors when we're in buildings that have lots of staircases. If someone comes into their classroom, whether it's me or one of my able-bodied classmates, make a joke about how they shouldn't be having a hard time walking up the stairs because they're young. When I'm there in the same classroom, just as young as them, and I can't really use the staircases, I use the elevators whenever possible. So is there any changes the college is looking to better the sensitivity among professors about things like that?
I've been having lots of discussions that don't necessarily have an end goal when having them, but I've met with people from student life to talk about more education to both faculty, RAs, and things like this, so that you don't have that kind of experience, so that people can be coached about how to engage. In the interim, before we come up with more concrete ways to address this, I would recommend telling the professor. My guess would be most faculty feel pretty bad that they hurt you. And if they don't feel bad, you know who they are. Right?
Well, I just want to share that I was aware of a few reports from different students about episodes that they have went through, like a breach of confidentiality, or even some claims of favoritism, and among other things. And that's why I'm pushing hard for a better training for everybody, faculty, supervisors, and the community as a whole, in terms of increasing the awareness of everybody regarding ADA. And what I can say as the Chief Diversity Officer, and I know in the past, my office was mostly seen as a place for faculty and staff. But I want that impression to go away. So I have 2 students this week coming to my office to share some concerns regarding other dimensions of diversity and inclusion. And I want you all to feel comfortable to stop by or to send me an email or ask for a meeting. And I will be glad to do that. And again, I know that I'm on Penn Hall, but I want you guys to start feeling like Penn Hall can be friendly to you. Yes, we have. You want to say something?
Wait, before we go on to the next question, I just remembered what I was going to say about how students can support their friends. Don't joke about disabilities. So don't say things like, oh, that was so stupid, oh, that was dumb. Don't use the R word. That kind of language can make students feel very singled out. And so even if it's just a joke, just don't use that kind of language. Try to find other ways to joke around without using terms that can actually offend people. If you can change your language when you're joking, then you'll make people feel more comfortable.
Bailey?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, based off of your question, I am the student representative on the ADA, so there is always a student who's trying to represent the population of people with disabilities on campus. So you're always free to come email me with your experiences if you feel too intimidated to talk to a staff member. All of our emails are on the website if you look up ADA. So there's always someone that you can talk to, and
Yes.
there is a student here, so.
Bailey, can you stand up and show yourself so people can
Hi.
recognize you?
Yep.
Yeah. And I also want to compliment what she said, that in the website of the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, now we have a subpage about, on people with disability. So we are going to start sharing some events in the future. We want you guys to reach out to us with suggestions. And that's the best way. So I am in my office. If I don't have people coming and to me and sharing their difficulties, their challenges, so it is really hard to really have a comprehensive view of what's going on, and therefore to find the right ways to support everybody, students, faculty, staff, the community as a whole.
One more question? I don't see any hands.
I know how much everybody's excited to ask questions.
First of all, thank you for, I know you both deeply, and hearing you speak, I felt layers of what you're saying, and it meant a lot to me personally. And also thank you for the people who've asked amazing questions. That's also meant a lot to me, because I'm a faculty member with a disability, and I don't say that publicly, but I am. Hi, I'm David Walsh, by the way, if you don't know me, religious studies. I just want to add one point to what I'm hearing, if I could kind of pull out something, that so much of what I'm hearing from questions and from what you said has to do with like the social aspect, the social side of living with a disability. And it strikes me when I was thinking about your comments and another comment about faculty not necessarily hearing what people are saying, that there's this idea that disability is about deficiency. I have an autoimmune disease, and that disease, my body is deficient in ways. But more importantly, what gives me a disability is this social deficiency. And the deficiency there isn't on me. It's on society not being organized, and even just within our college, the lack of ways that we're, was it you that said the thing about somebody said something about the accessibility in buildings. Oh, it was Nathalia said that, about that some buildings don't have accessibility. That is the deficiency that I think is so easy to miss when we think about it as the individual. And I really learned a lot about that from changing my understanding about student accommodations in the classroom. That accommodations aren't about addressing a student deficiency, it's about addressing a deficiency in my syllabus, in the way that I organize my exams. And so I've done a lot to try to change that, so that now all the time students will come to me with their list of accommodations, and I'll say, oh yeah, all that's already addressed. I think that's all I have to say. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Walsh. Absolutely. Yeah, disability, I think the reason we have disabilities is because society is set up in a way that makes it difficult for us to interact in the world. And if society would just change certain aspects, then we would be able to function fine. And some of us, I mean, a lot of us have what's considered as high functioning disabilities. We could function fine if we were given the tools we need. Because right now society is set up in a way that makes it difficult. And if society sets itself up differently, then we end up thriving. So it's all about not just what can we as disabled people do to make our lives easier, but it's also about what can society, what can other people do to help us get through this and help us live really awesome lives, because we can.
We have time for one more question. Okay. We have the one.
Stephen, thank you for that. I was really struck by your comment about the power of interest, of student interest. And I was wondering if students suffer if they feel pressure to go into fields of study that they themselves are maybe not as interested in. You know, there's a kind of social pressure, and I wonder if it hits people with these conditions more. Because certainly when I was on the committee for academic advising, you know, many people have these conditions, and many of them are in fields of study that they are not doing as well as in other fields. I just thought I'd ask that as, you know, as a fellow faculty member.
It's a great question, and my first response is I don't know what to do. There are a lot of students who don't know being ADHD is interest-driven, and so they're trying to live in a reward-driven way, which isn't going to work for them at all. They have to follow their interests to succeed, or they will not succeed. It's just that simple. And because they're interest-driven, having to be in areas, maybe because of parental pressure, social pressure, all kinds of things that they don't belong in, that's going to bring a host of other challenges, cognitive challenges, such as ADHD is not it's not a standalone disorder. It comes with generally one of three things, if not all three: anxiety, depression, and OCD. And I got to tell you, the OCD ADHD diagnosis, that's a very challenging diagnosis to have. We have students with that diagnosis here. It's really, really hard. Two very different motors working off of each other, and yet related. And so just know that when you have a student with ADHD or a friend and they disappear, it may be because they're interest-driven, it may be because they're ashamed to see you. And just an affirming hello. Hey, I'm thinking about you. Is everything good down there? And do you want to talk? That would be a way that I would address a student who's disappeared. I'd be hesitant to... The thing that made me say I don't know to your question is an ADHD, generally, they're constitutionally wired to resist being forced to do anything. And so there'd be a lot of friction if they were told, you have to major in this, or they would make a scene and they would disappear and stuff. So, but it happens. I mean, I've got 2 students in the wrong place right now. So, but we're working on it. I just want to add one more thing. Before I forget, thank you, Bailey. Thank you, Carlos. This was amazing. This is the first time, it's not the first time we've met to discuss such things. You've been on panels like that. But this was the most proactive meeting I've ever been in regarding these things at Gettysburg. Thank you both.
I just want to say to that also, sometimes students' interests change. And like for me, going into college, I was obsessed with religion. And I thought I was going to be a religious studies major. But then I got into art, and I was like, I like this better. And so I totally dropped my religion major, and I was like, I'm an art major now. Because my interests changed, and some students are just afraid to change. That once they've got into something, they're like, okay, I have to see it through now. Even if their interest changes halfway through. And it's even harder when your interest changes like into junior year, senior year, because what do? You're no longer interested in it, but you have to see it through now because it's too late. And so that's another thing to consider is maybe their interest has changed. Or maybe there's something else that's preventing them from seeing it through. Like for me, I had a very hard time with video games. And so for me, even though I was interested in my classes, the video games were more interesting and also kind of numbed the pain that I was feeling from the social exclusion, from the academic struggles. And so I would often not do my homework because I was focused on these video games. Or I was procrastinating by going to talk to whoever I could find and just talking for hours with them. So like sometimes it's not so much that they're not interested, it's that it's just so hard for them to stay engaged because there's so many other things kind of trying to bring their attention away from it.
Okay, thank you so much. I want to wrap up very quickly sharing something personal. When I was 22, I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease. I think most of you know what Crohn's is. And I was an engineer. I went through a master's in engineering, a PhD in engineering, a post-PhD in engineering, and I had very bad health. Like I have 2 sepsis and received the final rites twice. One day, a friend of mine said, with your background, I think you would succeed in business. So I moved to business and to higher education. Guess what? My Crohn's disease disappeared. I don't have any symptoms. I don't take any medicine for the past 18 years. So here's what I thought, and I always try to think a lot about things. I think I made a choice myself. I was not, told to make this choice. My father is a Navy officer. My mom has a degree in psychology. So nobody ever pressed me to be an engineer. But the engineering and myself were not matching, and organically speaking. So when I left engineering, I'm healthy now. So anyway, too much about Carlos, right? So I want to thank every one of you for being here tonight. And my promise is this is only going to be the first of many events. Okay? And as I said before, feel free to look for me on the 2nd floor of Penn Hall. I want to thank particularly that man over there, Adrian, because he did all the organization together with Bailey. So the 2 of you, I want really to applaud. As a matter of fact, I would like to ask for some applause. But also, besides the 2 speakers that did a wonderful job, I want to thank those 2 ladies over here. Our son, so thank you so much. And so the event is over, but if you want to come and ask anything personally to each one of them, feel free to do so. Have a great evening.